Thanks, David, for introductions and a warm welcome to you all. I guess first off, before starting, really a big thanks for, I know David from Barclays, Al from GDS as really being the co-organisers and this London Accessibility Meetup really being their brainchild. And I think, seeing the turnout in the room, so this coming together of people, of ideas, of technologies that push accessibility forward is fantastic to see. And I think, when we said who does accessibility as a day job in the room, clearly this room is full up of people who either work in or are interested in accessibility. And we spend our jobs as an accessibility person sort of problem solving and overcoming barriers that people with access needs face. And I think it's important to think about how we can all play our part in making sure we don't construct barriers for other people, for other digital and tech teams, for the whole organisation to find out about accessibility. So fab to see events like this, and I know from Barclays we want to do a lot more community engagement to kind of take this gospel of accessibility far and wide. So I want to try and make sure that tonight I don't talk about Blue Monday, about Brexit, about blockchain and other boring stuff. And I wanted to sort of really spend next 30 minutes or so talking to you and really telling you 3 stories. I want to touch on cornflakes, I want to touch on culture, and I want to touch on crystal ball gazing, so looking ahead. So just to kind of expand on that, oh, hello, got this upside down. So first off, I really want to tell you the story about the journey we have been on in Barclays around accessibility and how we are reimagining and redefining what accessibility is and why it matters to us, and how we're building a culture of inclusion, of going beyond compliance and checklists, and really giving you some sort of practical advice on some of our learns and insights in the approach we've taken. I want to do some forward looking at emerging technologies and what that means for the future of banking and some of the accessibility themed challenges and opportunities that presents. But before doing that, let me just sort of tell you a little bit about my role and my backstory of how I came to accessibility. So as the lead for digital accessibility in my bank, it means I set the enterprise-wide accessibility strategy around standards, around how our training tools for digital and tech teams, community engagement, outreach. So it's very varied, and luckily enough I have a fab, highly qualified, highly motivated accessibility team. And I think this thing about their varied skills and accessibility professionals is becoming a need for a hybrid skill set is going to be a kind of a theme or focus of my talk. So that's really my role. How did I get into this? I think when most people think about accessibility, they think about disability. They think about broken bodies and wrongly wired minds. But for me, on a very practical level, I think accessibility, or the lack of it, I think about how it constrains, restricts, choices, access, independence, and opportunity. And I'll share with you, I lost most of my sight as a teenager. So someone said, do you get nervous doing these talks? Imagine the audience naked, and I was thinking, what audience? So, there's that in my 20s. As a teenager, in my 20s, I got diabetes. In my 30s, I've been off in the autumn with major spinal surgery. I don't say this to make a point of kicking ass at disability top trumps, although I would. I say this for, I'm acutely aware of how trivial everyday tasks can be, exacerbated and magnified. We often think about people with impairments in isolation, but the real truth is that, whether we're looking at inequalities like disability, of gender, of age, of race, these inequalities kind of crisscross and may get compounded on top of one another. So I think about, my younger self, visually impaired Paul, and doing a trivial task like buying cereal in the supermarket. Having to walk down, and I don't really like cornflakes, to be honest with you, but they're kind of big, bold, and they're sort of unintentionally accessible for me to see on the blurry supermarket shelf. So, fab. I think about visually impaired diabetic Paul, and this compounding or layering effect of impairment, and that restricting my choices of products, having to go for healthier options and counting carbs and brightly boxed porridges and so forth. And then more recently, visually impaired diabetic Paul with major back pain, and rather than going to the supermarket, hobbling to the convenience store and being dependent on shop assistants to tell me about the dwindling products that met my needs. So I think, the smart ones amongst you will be saying, why don't you just do online shopping? And I'm kind of coming to that, people who face the biggest barriers in navigating the physical world, in communicating with others, I believe, arguably have the most benefit from the digital world that many of us are creating. I think that technology is this great leveler or enabler to remove those barriers, to improve lives, to unlock human potential. And I think that philosophy or theme is very much sort of weaved within our accessibility agenda. I think looking back over the last 5 years since I've been doing this, 5 years ago we didn't have a mobile banking app. Back then accessibility was about the build environment of our high street bank branches, but things have changed very rapidly. One of the turning points for us as Barclays was partnering with RNIB and their Make Money Talk campaign, being the first bank to offer talking cash machines, so helping low or no sight customers with print difficulties, independently get cash out of an ATM, something that many of you will take for granted. And realizing, customers voting with their feet, seeing that was good for business and good for society, was a major catalyst for change. And since then, we've done a number of accessibility services and support for customers with access needs, from virtual sign language interpreter services, some stuff around contactless payments I'll talk about, and high visibility debit cards. And we've come up with a bigger, bolder ambition to become the most accessible and inclusive FTSE company. So I think having that top-down commitment from your group board is hugely important, so that this isn't a side of a desk CSR do-gooder activity, but it is fundamental to how your organisation operates and the values that it has. And I think as we've gone on this journey, we've kind of, back then we used to view accessibility as this bureaucratically burdensome compliance checklist. But as things have matured, we've come to realise, that there's so many broader benefits to accessibility, about building a great experience for a greater number of people, with benefits that extend beyond disability. So, I might be visually impaired and that's a permanent impairment. Folks might be driving in a car and getting a text and you're situationally impaired, hopefully, you don't look at your phone. And folks that might be temporary impaired, looking at a cash machine on a bright sunny day. So when we start to think about accessibility in the context of it being broader application and appeal beyond just disability, then we have these broader benefits that it brings. I think the thing I really wanted to come on to was about this point of culture and how we think of accessibility, not just about getting our processes right and standards and compliance and checklists, i.e. building compliant products, but how we go one step above and beyond that, and how we build the right culture of inclusion across all of our workforce. So i.e. from the inside out, how we really sort of shift our thinking from, rather than accessibility being something that legally you have to do, how we change it to something that our colleagues, commercially, morally, ethically want to do. And when I think about what culture is, it's really, culture in my mind is about how a bunch of people in an organisation, sort of how it dictates what they think, feel, and act. So with these sort of three-pronged approaches, we need to think about, when we tell the accessibility story, what are we doing to inspire hearts? How do we humanise the accessibility conversations? What are we doing to educate heads? So the business case, the cold hard facts, for the analytical and rational people, to influence them. And what are we doing to provide the practical tools for the job? So how are we enabling hands? And I wanted to really just unpack some of these and touch on some of the things we're doing. So, when I think about Barclays, we have about 30,000 members of staff working in tech, digital and change teams worldwide. And many of these folks have never met a customer before. They've never stepped foot in a bank branch. So how do we build a sense of empathy and compassion that our customers come in all different shapes and sizes? We do that for a number of ways, through surveys, through social media. But ultimately, it boils down to storytelling. How do we tell the wow moments when we get it right from an accessibility standpoint? And how do we tell the pain points when we get it horribly wrong, to really close that digital divide of those using our digital services and those creating it? And we do it in a way that, you know, makes sense in context for us in banking. You know, I should say much of this sort of presentation, who was at TechShare Pro? Okay, a few. Yeah, good, lovely. Because I was going to say, it just came to me, you know, lots of this is similar to what I've talked at a month or two back. But hey, blame Al, it was his idea. So let me give you a real quick example about how we inspire hearts in sort of banking. So a few months back, I heard a story from a mum, Louise, who complained to the bank. So a mum had a teenage son, had autism, he was borderline nonverbal, and the complaint was along the lines of what other sort of teenager-themed debit cards, current accounts, did we offer to help her son, when he was in town with his support worker, independently go and buy stuff from shops. And the mum had got around this to date by using a prepaid Starbucks card, I think it was, so that her son could, when he was out and about with his support worker, only go to Starbucks to buy a coffee or sandwich. And what more could we do? So one of the things we did was sent out one of these BPay bracelets. So it's a contactless payment device. It's really got the same contactless NFC chip that would be in your debit or credit card, but in a wearable, so in a bracelet or a key ring. And it works, it creates a second separate virtual current account or wallet that you top up with credit, just like a pay-as-you-go mobile phone. So very convenient for parents with teenagers and so forth. And we sent one of these out, time passed, we got the feedback in from mum about how did you find it. And, you know, she said to us that, you know, her son could buy more stuff from more places more easily than ever before. So not just Starbucks, but Sainsbury's, McDonald's, wherever young people go. And, you know, i.e. he could do more, so he was enabled. And she went on to sort of say, well, not just that, but bearing in mind he was borderline nonverbal, when he used it to buy stuff in shops, the shop assistants would be like, whoa, what is that? And, you know, someone would come alive and say, well, this is Barclays BPay, it's a contactless wearable device, this is where you get it from, a website. And, you know, it's great seeing him come alive and, you know, great sort of salesman, we should have paid from commission. And I think for me, that's about sort of changing someone's communication and confidence, not just for friends and family, but shopkeepers and strangers. So, i.e. he was empowered, he could become more. You know, at Barclays, our digital accessibility team, you know, our mission is about using and leveraging inclusive technology to enable and empower all people to work, bank, and reach their full potential. And, you know, that's a lovely strapline, it is, but it's kind of hollow when we don't say it through the personal stories that really breathe life into it. And I would encourage you all to think about what more you can do to think about how you humanize some of these conversations. So not about checkpoints that have failed, but about customers who are frustrated, for example, that really brings it to life and hits home. Second pillar was around how do we educate heads. So mid last year, we commissioned some research. We found that the purple pound, so the spending power of disabled people and their households, was now, as of mid last year, £265 billion. So that's a reason why we should pay attention to this topic, why other organisations should do. But often we spend a lot of time with projects internally, with vendors and suppliers who just still don't get this. And when we really tease out what's holding them back, what are the resistors to change, we see these common themes, these common myths and misconceptions around, well, surely the disability market's tiny, or we must be doing an okay job because no one complains. Or, you know, isn't accessible design, i.e. plain text, all boring? Or is it really my responsibility? Isn't it someone else's? So we created a short video to really sort of bring this home.
5 common myths about accessibility. Debunked.
My users don't complain about accessibility, so we must be doing okay.
Well, research has revealed that only 10% of people encountering an accessibility issue report it. The other 90% of those potentially frustrated users are likely to click away. It's estimated that these click-away customers could represent a lost spending power of around £12 billion. So if your users aren't complaining, maybe they're just clicking away instead.
But fixing accessibility is expensive, isn't it?
Of course, retrofitting applications for accessibility can be costly, which is why it makes far more sense to just plan your projects properly and get it right from the start. Build your project with situational, temporary and permanent impairments in mind. Then everyone benefits and accessibility costs are minimal. Do the job right and you won't be paying more to fix it later.
But accessibility, it's not really my job, is it?
We're striving to become the most accessible and inclusive company in the FTSE 100. We're changing the way we develop products, thinking about the widest range of users, and finding out how all of our customers experience our services. These are ambitious and important goals, so at Barclays, accessibility is everybody's job, and that means you too.
But the market is just too small to justify all this time and effort.
In the UK alone, there are an estimated 12.9 million people with a disability. That's like seeing the population of London, Birmingham, Leeds, Sheffield, Glasgow, Manchester, Liverpool, Bristol and Cardiff all added together. And that's without counting everyone who uses accessibility features every day, like captions, because they make life easier. So the market is anything but small. It's significant.
But accessible design means boring design.
Far from being boring, embracing accessibility can open up innovation. Accessible design should work well for those that need it and be invisible to those that don't. Accessible really doesn't need to mean boring. So unleash your creativity and build for the widest audience you can. At Barclays, we're busting myths and building skills. Increasing accessibility for everybody.
Cool. So hopefully some of those myths, I'm sure many of you have heard time and time again as you've worked in this field. And I think it's important too that we package some of this information, advice, resources, both internally and externally, for suppliers and everyone to just aid their understanding. So the video is available on YouTube if you search for Barclays Access. And again, this infographic, very noisy slide, I'm doing my best to audio describe what's on here, again is also available on our website, so links at the end. So the third pillar of culture was around the practical tools for the job, so how we are enabling hands. And we do this in a variety of ways, not least by investing heavily in our automated accessibility tooling, so that our digital, our tech teams can more easily scan and spot and fix some of the common accessibility issues earlier by running these tools iteratively and often to really weed out some of these sort of common issues. I think that as our digital teams, their sort of ways of working have changed, and folks familiar with lean and agile and DevOps concepts will appreciate digital stuff now gets built in bite-sized chunks. So accessibility consultants who partner those projects, we need to kind of change our ways of working too. So rather than 101 compliance checklists, we need to sort of think about how we take more of a principles-based approach in partnering with those project teams. And therefore, awareness and training suddenly becomes incredibly important, if not vital. So something that we're doing is around mandating e-learning on digital accessibility across all of our digital and tech teams, about role-based, classroom-based training, so the need to knows, whether you're a designer or a UX professional, whether you're a developer, a tester, QA, whether you're a project manager or product owner. So that again, you know that how your role contributes to developing accessible services. And finally, we need to kind of build it into the building blocks of what digital teams use. So whether that's design patterns, style guides, component libraries for folks familiar with that. We need to kind of make sure that accessibility is as easy as possible to get it right and get it right first time. And I think when these things come together and we build the right culture of inclusion across our workforce from the inside out, it sort of shifts our perspective of accessibility, of not just treating it as checklists, but about fundamentally the people it impacts. So the example we've got here is around our accessible pin century device. So this is an award-winning token. So we had a talking token. So if you bank with Barclays, you do your online banking, it's one of these, looks a bit like a calculator, and you pop your debit card in, you enter your PIN code, and out pops a passcode that you use for online banking at home, or if you're in one of our bank branches. And the feedback we got from several customers was, well, you have a talking version, but why can't we have a bigger button, bigger screen, talking token? So something that covers a broader range of access needs. So it's exactly what we developed. So very user consultative approach, so dealing with several disabled customers, colleagues, suppliers, stakeholders, to really tease out and get it right and iterate, so a whole host of prototypes to make sure we had a device that worked for everyone. And one of the ways we did that was by leveraging, so building from and building off these inclusive design principles. So we love these. This is from our friends at the Pacello Group. And it really takes it one step further from WCAG and accessibility checklists to think about sort of human-centered design. So how do we build this token so that it's simple and intuitive to use for customers? And that involves spending time with those customers saying, well, what would make it intuitive? So, okay, maybe it's that the buttons are in a similar layout or similar tactile markings to our cash machines. So porting some of that know-how and learns over to our device so it can be as usable as possible for everyone. And again, this infographic is also available on our website. And again, by sort of actively listening and acting on customer feedback, another example in recent months was around our high visibility debit cards. So many older consumers in particular tell us that the 3-digit security code on the back is tiny. We do it in italics. So why can't we have it bigger and bolder and easier to see? So we have. And great feedback so far. So again, really important to continue those conversations and seek feedback from your customers. And much of the resources we have, so our diverse personas, which really cover off how people with different impairments use technology in different ways. We make all this available, and we love hearing stories where organizations take this, they use it, they adjust it and make it their own. So again, it's a story of democratizing accessibility know-how, which is so important. Now, I've kind of whizzed through that culture of inclusion because I wanted to come on to this sort of final piece about emerging technologies and the future for banking. Now I believe, and again I can't see this, so I think the words are something like, banking will evolve so that it will include simpler, safer, smarter tech, powered by predictive insights and personalised in a way that works for everyone. And I wanted to really just sort of step us through that sentence and sort of touch on some of the new innovation and what it means for customers with access needs, so for disabled and older people. Now, first off, I think the way we bank is getting simpler on our smartphones. So maybe pop your hand up if you use your smartphone, if you do mobile banking. No idea what happened there. I think lots of hands went up. I appreciate the interaction. Yeah, so the vast majority of you, and no surprise in a sort of room full of digitally savvy folks. And I think we can probably all, sort of empathise with the fact that doing your banking on a tiny smartphone screen, it really distills down the core information and the core tasks that you do. At Barclays, we have, I think, 5.5 million customers using our mobile banking app on average each and every day. So again, making sure that those core need-to-knows, your bank balance, your transaction history, we need to make it as simple as possible, the best experience. So I think there's simpler content. I think there's also simpler interfaces too. So something we launched at the back end of last year was Siri payments. So if you do this sort of thought experiment to think through, if you're having to pay a friend, let's say, it involves a number of steps, a number of screens, a number of form fields you have to fill out. But actually, just by having a conversation and saying, pay Bob £3 for coffee, again, it makes it a lot easier. So I'm sure at CS recently always talk about Alexa-enabled skills and voice assistants. There's lots of wizardry, it's the latest kind of hype. But I think when you take away all the gadgetry, I think for me is about how this sort of shift of, rather than users having to learn increasingly complicated systems, there's now this paradigm shift where those increasingly complicated systems now learn us. And I think that's of huge benefit and merit for many people. And we also need to think about, these conversational assistants, if you're making payments, for context of how our customers do it. So if I'm out and about in a restaurant and I need to pay, a friend for a bill, I'm not really going to be talking to my phone. We don't really see people using their phone, talking to it in public, but it's great in the home, in a quiet space or setting. So again, building that flexibility is key. I think the second point is about, not just simpler, but safer ways of how we're banking. And I think contactless, certainly in the bubble that is London, is becoming hugely prevalent. So contactless payments, whether it's your contactless debit card, whether it's your smartphone with Apple Pay or Android Pay and so forth, or even a wearable like BPay, makes it incredibly easy, arguably too easy, for people to part with their cash and buy stuff in shops and restaurants. So all those barriers, if you had dexterity difficulties to get your debit card out, having the sight to put it the right way into a chip and PIN device with a cognition to actually remember and enter your PIN. There's a number of hurdles for many people there. So contactless is making things easier. As is biometrics. So whether it's using your fingerprints to log onto our mobile banking app, whether it's using your voice prints to confirm that you are who you say you are for telephone banking, or something we've just launched this month, using your face to authenticate that you are who you say you are in the latest iPhones. Again, it makes that security step seamless, and it removes, sort of difficulty what would have been for many people with access needs. Now, the kind of third area is this point about smarter tech. And I'll let you into a little secret that at Barclays, 90% of the interactions we have with our customers are through a screen. So they're not through speaking to someone at the bank branch, they're not speaking to a human at the end of the phone, they're through a screen. And half of those screens are customers' own. So it's the smartphone in your pockets, it's your home PC that you do online banking from. And the other half are our screens, so our branch kiosks and cash machines. And when we think about how technology is evolving, the smartphone in your pockets, something we've recently launched is mobile check imaging. So if someone gives me a paper check, I can now use my camera, I can take a snapshot of it, machine vision runs, and I can get that check processed and paid far quicker than historically having to trot to the bank branch. So again, sort of a great customer experience and more efficiency for banks processing checks. I think in our bank branches too, so kiosks are getting more feature rich, they do more stuff, but we need to make sure that the accessibility features and settings they have on them, again, don't leave anyone behind, and we build them in a sort of multimodal way, so there's multiple ways to do the same things. So for example, one of the feedback we get is around actually entering in your debit card. When we put these anti-fraud tamper devices, it becomes even more difficult to get your debit card in and out, especially compound that if you've got arthritis or RSI. So one of the ways we're offering flexibility is around turning on NFC contactless sensors. So rather than putting your debit card in and out, you can tap your debit card or you can tap your smartphone. And actually if visually impaired Paul with an Android device and our Barclays mobile banking app, I can actually request cash when I'm in the queue for the cash machine and say I want £40. I can enter my PIN all accessibly with talkback and the screen reader blaring. I can sort of tap to transact to get my money. So again, building that flexibility into our kiosks, incredibly important. So the next bit is really about powered by predictive insights, and I think this is the artificial intelligence, the AI bits. And I think we are in mid-January right now, so I'm sure many of you will probably be in a similar position to me where you've probably overdone it at Christmas and sales shopping, getting paid at the end of a month, kind of being close to or overdrawn, breaching your overdraft limit. And historically the relationship, the notification you had from your bank is usually a text message saying you've gone overdrawn, you've breached your overdraft limit, you've got an overdraft fee of X, have a nice day. So this kind of reactive alert, which isn't a great customer experience. And I think with the advent of AI, being able to better understand our saving and spending habits, that then opens up a whole world of being able to preemptively notify customers earlier, that, hey, based on your usual monthly habits, Paul, it looks like mid-month your outgoings are sort of going away out quicker than they should do. So you've got some options, some course corrections. You can A, tighten your belt. You can B, move some savings in. You can C, extend your overdraft, let's say, or D, you can take out some borrowing, a loan or a credit card, and kind of having a push button process to act on any of those responses. So rather than having to apply for lots of products, in a cluttered way, so removing the administrative faff. So AI is going to be hugely helpful to better help us manage our money. I think the other area is around bank statements, and I'm sure many of you will agree that bank statements are very cryptic, this kind of big table of line items that is quite hard to understand. And I think really what we need is a far more plain English way of understanding those line items, and I think AI is helping to better categorize, of our monthly spend, which items are linked to bills or to food or entertainment or coffee, and to better categorize and better present that in a way that's relevant to the individual. So I scooped a very colourful pie chart from the web in the middle here, and it shows us sort of monthly ingoings, outgoings, and it would probably be great for visual learners, but if you're colourblind, it wouldn't really make much sense. And I kind of thought actually it's really important too that we visualise this in a way that works for different audiences, so they can better budget, they can better understand their money. And the kind of final area of AI and predictive insights is the sort of financial advisor bots in your pocket. So being able to help better sort of review product comparisons to make sure that your savings are earning the maximum interest, and that the loans, the credit cards you have, on the flip side, the lowest interest that they should be. So again, really making it easier and for everyone to make the most of their money. Now, the sort of final bit is about personalised in a way that works for everyone. So pop your hand up if you're aware of open banking. Okay, what's that like? It's quite a lot. Like third, half, I don't know. Yeah, so this is a new banking law. It happened this weekend actually, just gone was the first wave. And the way I sort of think about it is that it's built on this premise that as customers, we might use a bank, but really we own our own financial data. So this kind of rich treasure trove of, all our monthly ingoings and outgoings and where we spend our money and so forth. So actually we should be able to take it with us. And there's an image up here which shows a customer with, 3 different banks, maybe 3 different bank accounts, current account, savings and so forth. And really what open banking does is, provided the customer gives permission from each of those banks, they can take their finance data and make them view it, manage it, move their money, make the most of their money in a different place, in a hub, so a third party. So this is still, your finance data flows through API, so it's done in a safe, secure, standardized way. And the trusted third party who owns the hub still has to be registered and regulated. So data privacy and sort of bank regulations, they need to meet all of this. But ultimately what it means is that, where you bank with and then kind of where you go online to manage your money can be 2 different places. So the amount of customers and colleagues with disabilities we speak to who, they say things like, yeah, I would sort of take an ISA out or bank with Bank X, but their website sucks. Or, maybe their corporate brand, it's really hard to kind of read the details if you're sort of low sight or colourblind. So for the first time, what open banking does is it gives people more kind of choice, more control over, where they go to online to sort of manage their money. And it, encourages innovation across the bank. So this hub in the middle could be traditional banks, it could be fintechs, it could be challenger banks. So again, far more choice, far more flexibility, far more control for customers. And in time, various services will plug in which can help you understand, are you paying the right amount for your utility bills, and making it easier to switch to save money, for example. So open banking is going to be, hugely beneficial for all of us, but in particular, when I think about it from an accessibility standpoint, this added choice over the website and the mobile apps you use is going to be, you know, of particular importance to customers. So we've kind of touched on, you know, the future of, you know, banking, how technology is sort of changing, and I think we need to think about how technology is actually changing us too. And there's a sort of picture up here of my two kids, Jess and Joe. Jess working the unicorn onesie. I took this a couple of months back, and I'd got a typewriter from a friend, and I thought, oh, okay, I'll give my typewriter to the kids to, and it blew their mind. You know, they sort of thought all these fiddly bells and whistles and whirls to actually get it working, and actually seeing as you press down how it works, you know, they just thought it was witchcraft. And I think this goes back to when we think about Generation Z, so i.e. kids and teenagers of today, who are really going to be the creators and inventors of tomorrow's technology. We kind of need to be mindful of, you know, their usage expectations of technology. So, i.e., you know, they swipe and you know, pinch and zoom and expect a sort of immediacy, you know, technology to just be intuitive and just work. And I think when we take that one step further, you know, what characterises Generation Z? Well, you know, they're the most globally aware of some of the big societal challenges than ever before, than millennials and so forth. You know, they're financially prudent, they're entrepreneurial, they recognise the power of crowds, so whether it's product reviews online, whether it's social media, and I think, you know, they're digitally native, obviously, so they can find answers through YouTube videos quicker than they can speak to someone, a call centre agent reading from a script. But I think this point of seeking out the social impact and purpose is also really key as well. I think, you know, kids, when we go and talk around accessibility at schools, I think they innately know, but we kind of learn the most, we grow the most when we speak to, we engage with people not like us, because it's kind of only in those instances that we understand profound things, that they are people like us. And I think, you know, for kids, they kind of seek out difference and welcome it in. And I think as adults, with our unconscious biases, sometimes we have to kind of relearn and force ourselves to think these things through more broadly. So when I think about, you know, the sort of kids of today and the inventors of tomorrow, I'm sort of hugely hopeful about this point on sort of purpose and social impact with regards to accessibility. And the kind of final slide is really just to sort of think about the future gaze of what this means for accessibility and for the accessibility profession. So I've kind of touched on this sort of organisational mindset shift, so this, you know, legal stick to commercial carrots, the culture change. And I think that places greater demands of what it means to be an accessibility professional. I think that, you know, historically, accessibility professionals were technical coders and auditors that could kind of audit a web page and give you a glossy report that showed you everything that was broken. And I think although those technical skills are still, you know, much needed, actually what we need is this hybrid skill set. People that have got the business savviness and know-how to influence, prioritise, progress and ultimately fix some of these accessibility issues and make sure that they're not there in the first place. We need people with, you know, the right people skills, who can train, who can evangelise, who can conduct user research to tease out some of these latent needs of what's broken and the best ways to sort of fix things. And I think for me, something that Barclays are involved with is at an international level, so the IAAP, so this International Association of Accessibility Professionals. So if you sort of come to today and, you know, you're getting some of the general awareness and overview of accessibility, I think taking that one step further, so this IAAP offers a great way of getting the textbook, the test, the title to kind of evidence that you are an accessibility expert, and there's a number of modules involved in IAAP. I think the kind of third and final thing around the future of accessibility is this view of mainstreaming. So I've touched on, you know, the accessibility know-how. It's not just for your accessibility experts or your accessibility team in an organisation. It's actually for everyone needs to know the basics of this. And I think we also see this mainstreaming of accessibility features and settings, so in the smartphones in our pockets. And although I think that's incredibly powerful, I think the future challenge is making sure that people know, can find, can use, can master those accessibility settings quicker. And actually AI and tech helping us do that. So if I borrow someone else's device and I'm pinching to zoom it because I can't see it well enough, it should preempt and anticipate and ask me, did you want everything, all the text big here? So again, making it even easier to adjust and auto-personalize to individuals. So I think that's going to be hugely important when we think about the future of accessibility settings in our devices. I think the kind of closing thought is, when I started accessibility 5 years back, I think the people who were left out and left behind were people with access needs, so disabled and older people. But I think the tide's shifting, and I think ultimately the people who are left out and left behind now are the organisations and corporates who don't pay attention to this topic. And kind of final points in terms of some of the links to our accessibility, so business to business portal, again sort of up on the screens. So Q&A, so hopefully my glamorous assistants.
So yeah, a big round of applause for Paul, please. So depending on which clock I look at, we've got 9 minutes or 10 minutes, because they're not in sync. Anybody got any questions in the room? I'll go to this one first. There you go. Sorry, Nick. There you are, sir.
Good evening, Paul, and good evening, everybody. My name is Nafi, and I work at Barclays. Thank you for the really, really interesting talk. You mentioned about the enormous value of the pebble fund. I think it was 265 billion, is that correct?
Yes.
Okay, and there's about 12.9 million disabled people in the UK. But oftentimes when I go, for example, to the RNIB store, or when you shop for software and stuff online, they're all incredibly expensive. And if we have such a mass market, why aren't these products cheaper and more affordable? Because I don't think a lot of these products are affordable for most disabled people. They either get it through work, or if they can, if they come from a really rich family, which is not my case. So why is that? And is there something that we can do to make those more affordable for people?
Sure. Okay, great question. Thanks, Naki. So I guess sort of first off those sort of numbers, we said the purple pound spending power of disabled people and families, 265 billion. The 12 billion was the online spending power of disabled people, so just spending online, not in shops. So that's why the two numbers differ. I think your question though is very much, why is assisted technology so expensive still? And I think, traditionally this was, and you use these words sort of flippantly of kind of special products for special people with special needs. And I think, things are changing now, and having more mainstream products, so accessibility features in your mainstream devices, which do the vast majority of some of those accessibility features. I think something like screen readers, like expensive JAWS and Zoom text and so forth. And now there's open source alternative free options like NVDA, like VoiceOver. So in many ways, that's starting to shift and reduce or lower the barriers to entry, the cost of getting your hands on assisted technologies. And I think as more organizations start to, build some of those into devices, again, that makes it even easier for people to get equipped with the assisted tech tools to jump on board that digital bus. So hopefully that goes sort of some way in sort of answering your question of reducing cost of assistive tech. Any other questions?
I have to do mic running. It's not open.
Get a workout.
Hi, I'm Mike Taylor, BBC.
I don't think your mic's working, but don't worry, I'll repeat it.
I'm wondering what can you do for older people? I know a number of older people who are panicking greatly with bank branches closing, and they're often resistant to using the newest smartphones and so forth, and they rely on getting to a branch, however they get there, and having someone to speak to and deal with their stuff. And they often have very simple phones that can't do these advanced things. So what can you do for them?
Sure. No, great question, Mike. And just to sort of repeat that, it was very much, what more can we do for older consumers who typically prefer and use our high street bank branches? So there's a number of things in there, and we run sort of customer satisfaction surveys every year where we look at disabled consumers, we look at older consumers, and there's some sort of trends and challenges that older consumers have. And you're right, some of it is, much as we can run digital inclusion programs to provide them with the right IT skills and confidence and tools to take advantage of websites and mobile apps. Ultimately, some of them just might not want to. They might be comfortable going into the bank branch and speaking to a person. So making sure that we offer a multitude of channels. So, branch banking, telephone banking, as well as online and mobile banking. So there is that choice for our customers. I think there's some unique challenges as well of older consumers around, and think of in sort of some extremes around, being in a care home and getting cash out. And when we speak to many older consumers, we hear all these horror stories of giving their debit card and PIN codes to strangers and care workers and so forth to pop down to the shops and sort of get cash out for them. So again, we're looking at how we can better offer some of these sort of delegated access, so i.e. the role of a carer and guardian to help, maybe that's having read-only access to make sure that, your older family member is paying, their bills on time and so forth. Maybe it's about helping, get cash out. Many older people will get cash out and pop it in their purse or wallet, and that is how they traditionally budget. So they have so much at the start of the week, and that's how much they like to budget, much as all the new whizzy stuff I was sort of talking about. So we need to sort of be mindful of some of these different needs, different abilities, different preferences. So hopefully that kind of explains on some of the nuances of what older consumers need. But you're right, we need to make sure they're not left out when we think about just digital. Okay, any other questions?
You've got a hard one coming. It's from Jamie.
I think my reputation precedes Amy from the BBC, another BBC person. Hey Mike. Earlier up, you mentioned that you had some automated testing tools. We have some as well, and I'd be really interested in your strategy. Where do you define the edge between what's automatable and what requires human intelligence? And also, are your tools open source and/or can I have a copy? Please?
Okay, so I've got to be careful with what I say because, our typical stance is that we don't promote or endorse other suppliers and other products. So I think in sort of broad brush strokes, if you take and sort of geeking out now, something like our WCAG checkpoints and checklists, folks will be familiar that, a minority of checkpoints can be automatically tested and assessed, i.e. has this image got an alt text and so forth. So we know that automated tools can do a minority of the checkpoints, but they can't do all of it. So it's a useful way of providing scarce manual testing resources to focus on those other points. We also sort of look at it that as we are building new digital content, so a new web page, we need tools that we can use in a test environment, sort of internally, whether it's a web page or a mobile app. But we also need tools that can crawl over all of our digital estates, so the hundreds of websites and domains we've got, the sort of thousands of millions of pages, and can run some sort of tests at a enterprise level to make sure that not just that we build, digital content right first time, but that our digital estate is maintained accessibly. And again, we use not just one, but a number of tools to do that. So folks will be familiar, there are various kind of browser plugins and extensions you can use, which provide some of that sort of coverage across sort of checking a single page, which is very useful at a sort of small scale where there's, a focused and thorough audit needed, but also actually having something that can be broadened out and automated at mass is also important. So that, ultimately these testing tools, we're trying to improve kind of the quality of what we build, the kind of coverage and consistency. So hopefully you get from there that there's a number of different tools that we use in a number of different ways. And it's becoming increasingly important with this lean and agile ways of working, and whether it's weekly or daily releases, again, changes the dynamics. So hopefully that was kind of help. I feel a bit like a politician, sort of sidestepping the question, Jamie, but hopefully that's kind of helpful as an approach.
Luke, can you give him back the microphone?
Oh God, give me a microphone again. What I'm interested in is the strategy element. How do you decide what you tackle with automation? And kind of where's your cutoff? When do you stop investing in automation and start investing in people, and what guided that decision?
I think as traditionally when we were building multi-month digital projects in a typical waterfall approach of requirements gathering and design, and then development and testing QA and sort of testing at the end, and realizing that the added time and cost and effort to retrofix extremely costly, that having an accessibility consultant who was doing all of that manual testing at the end was not an efficient way of working. So again, by using some of these accessibility automated tools, which can be used earlier, is also important, and actually it frees up some of the accessibility team to spend time earlier in some of those design conversations. So when you're looking at wireframes, for example, then again we can kind of provide advice at a far earlier stage, so that hopefully some of these accessibility issues down the line don't creep in. So yeah, hopefully that kind of it answers that question.
Jamie, if it helps, come and talk to us afterwards, if that helps.
Yeah.
Go for Al.
So I've got a question about checklists. So we don't want accessibility to be a checklist, but when people don't know much about accessibility, checklists can be incredibly useful. So what's your approach to raising capability of people at Barclays?
Sure.
Do you utilise checklists plus other things like training?
Yep. I think many of you will be familiar that you have a project that comes to you, they have to do make sure their web page is accessible, and I think in the past sending them off to a WCAG website where there's very detailed, very technical, very long-winded success criteria and best practices is sometimes overwhelming, and it might make sense to developers, but actually project managers, testers, designers, it's hard to understand. So actually a lot of the work we've been doing over the last couple of years is how do we build some of the summaries, some of the overviews that take some of the sort of perceivable, operable, understandable, robust, so the principles of accessibility, and kind of starts to unpack it. So having better summaries that get newbies and people used to this, so that there is that consistent understanding across a project team, and then having sort of better, more detailed and technical advice, resources, code snippets for our developers that are linked to some of our Barclays design language and component libraries, is one of the ways that we've sort of worked it. But I think it comes back to having really good summaries that make sense both to a technical audience and a generalist audience.
Cool. I think we've got time for one last question. You've already got a microphone.
Hi, well, Christine from Open Inclusion. My question is really around the open banking. It's here now, obviously, in training to come in anyway, over the next few weeks. For people with access needs specifically, they no longer have to access their data directly through individual banks. So how do you see this as an opportunity and or a threat to the traditional banks in providing more accessible banking, and how can we really leverage this new legislation and regulations to make banking easier and more accessible to people?
Sure. Okay, thanks, Christine. I guess that question on open banking I mentioned it gives customers more choice and flexibility, that you might bank with HSBC, let's say, but you don't just have to go to the HSBC website or app to view and manage your money. And I think that added flexibility means that now many banks, many of the traditional banks, are now upping their game and being very mindful of the digital experience and how we make this as accessible and inclusive as possible. So I think that innovation and raising the bar for banks has ultimately got to be a good thing for our customers in terms of giving them added choice and flexibility. And there's some accessibility theme nuances as well where we're sort of looking at, which is going to be quite interesting in terms of how it unfolds, which will hopefully help many customers with access needs. But I think at this stage, it's very much over the next 12 to 18 months. There's been lots of media coverage on open banking, and it's still quite theoretical and murky. I think over the coming weeks, as more banks open up their services, as more sites and services start to use it, and people really understand the value and benefit of it, I think then more entrants will sort of jump on the bus, and there will be more options for customers with access needs and everyone as well. So exciting times.
Fantastic. Can we have another round of applause for Paul, please?